So this presentation is going to be a little bit different from the ones you're used to on Tuesdays. The format is going to be that of a retrospective, and I'm going to use my life choices as a sort of a case study in, in trying to understand how we can change the way human societies interact with our planet and our environment. A quick bit of context here. The story starts in Silicon Valley just after the financial crash in 2008. I got my first job there. I was designing hardware and chips for data centers. I worked on some of the streaming technologies for YouTube, for instance. It was really wonderful work. It was extremely creative because, it's one of the few industries existing today where you can still build something concrete from nothing. In building silicon chips that part of a greater ecosystem, and the time I spent there, it kind of infuses you with this idea of neoliberal technocracy, that the technology will save the world, that it'll lead to infinite growth and prosperity for all. And something about that vision really rubbed me the wrong way, and I started asking myself, why I was doing what I was doing. And I didn't have any good answers for it. So I decided to try to use my skills in working with things that I really cared about. And at the time, I was really exploring how to do a transition to clean energy. So in 2010, 2011, I joined a company called Angaza, and we were designing and building solar systems, whether it was lights or phone chargers or fans, things like that, for the developing world, specifically in East Africa, Tanzania, to transition from very basic dirty energy sources such as kerosene and coal, small scale coal, all the way to solar, because they didn't have the electricity infrastructure to begin with. So there were no grids, so to speak. And so essentially the transition, they could have essentially leapfrogged the transition to clean energy directly. And why East Africa is because in 2007, a company called Safaricom, which is the largest mobile operator in East Africa, introduced the idea that you could trade your mobile minutes, so your prepaid credits, with others, creating a parallel banking system in essence. And so what happened is that the population of East Africa went from 3% of the population having a bank account, jumped suddenly to 90% being banked within a decade, which is insane. So it created this opportunity to get out of poverty, to be able to save and plan for the future. So our idea was to build into solar systems a financing plan. And why that was important, solar light at the end of the day, in 2010, 11 was still $50, $60, $80 a piece for the entire unit. And a typical customer in East Africa would find it very difficult to spend that much money upfront even then. So what we did was we allowed them to purchase it for $10 upfront, and then they would make payments as they use the system. So just like you put in prepaid credits into your prepaid mobile phone, you would put in energy credits into the light, and you would essentially use the mobile money system. You're essentially texting money, and that refills the light, and then you use it until you pay off the value of the light. And what we did was we did extensive pilots in East Africa where we studied behaviors and how the system could work with people. And although it was a very low-cost, ingenious system, it turned out to be a fairly complex bit of interaction with the technology. And eventually the company moved on to a different business model, but still built in this idea of financing plans into otherwise expensive hardware. But what it did was it opened up this avenue to be able to disseminate technology at a very low cost to people, to help them come out of poverty. These economies transition very quickly, essentially. But what came out of it for me was I got to spend time with these people in very rural agrarian societies, very connected to the land. This is our office under a mango tree in a village, and we lived in these little villages on the edge of the Serengeti, right by Lake Victoria. And it was the first time for me as a city boy to really, get to experience nature in its full glory. I'd see, herds of wildebeest and giraffes just walking by, crocodiles, the occasional lioness. And, it's the first time in my life I got really connected to nature, and this inadvertently showed me this other side of things. But I went back to Silicon Valley and I continued building technology because that's what I loved and I was good at. And I spent a few years building different virtual reality technologies because I thought there was something really interesting there from a technical perspective. And so in 2010, I built one of the first 360-degree camera rigs that was synchronized and solved a bunch of filmmaking problems. Continued building this is a rig that was used by AMD for Hollywood films, by Google, etc. I also founded a startup in Australia, in Sydney, where we were doing basically building like very large scale multi-user virtual reality spaces where you could use your body and move around and interact inside a virtual world with other physical beings. And involving myself in all of these VR technologies really started piquing my interest into how you could tell stories, how you could interact within these novel immersive worlds. In 2015, I ended up meeting, 2014, I ended up meeting this crazy French filmmaker called Pierre Friquet. And he had money from the French government to make VR films, but he had no idea how to. And I had the technical expertise to do it. So we got together and we made a bunch of films over the next few years, which really like pushed the boundary on, telling stories in this immersive media. And the first one we did was called Jet Lag, which was one of the first narrative VR films to come out. We had a great time making it, but we also toured the world. We went to Cannes Film Festival and a bunch of other film festivals with it. And in the process, while we shot part of the film in Mumbai, and while we were in Mumbai filming this, there was an earthquake in Nepal, almost 2,000 kilometers away, and the building we were shooting on was shaking from that earthquake. It was so powerful. It was an 8.0 earthquake. This happened in April 2015. And, I saw it on the news that day, and it was just something else on the telly, and it didn't affect me. I had spent two months living in Nepal, just walking around the mountains and connecting with the place a few months ago. And that night I went to bed and I had this insane dream that I couldn't remember when I woke up, but I got possessed with the idea that I had to go to Nepal and tell a story, whatever it was. So I packed my bags, picked up my filming gear, and we left for Nepal. I left and Pierre said, I'll come with you. And we spent 6 weeks traveling Nepal, working with the Air Force and the Army, and doing rescue missions and food drops. The entire infrastructure of the country had collapsed. And as a result, we got to see a very, very interesting side of a place, under duress, under stress, where everything has collapsed. And what really came about was the spirit of the people. And, everybody was so dignified, and they really, in these times of need, they really cared for each other and wanted everybody to, get back and thrive together. And we had these insane experiences. Almost lost my life in a helicopter crash twice, actually, going through these crazy ravines, doing these rescue missions and stuff. And what came out of it was this other film that we did. It was called Vibrations. We also did a whole bunch of film festivals with it. And during this process and making the film and such, it became evident that being able to tell stories effectively in VR is able to bring about empathy in people. And this is very, very evident. And some of the early studies in VR were starting to come out about how you can connect people to the subjects, to the worlds, if you do this right. We're going to jump into empathy in a bit, but first some manta rays. Circa 2013, I ended up in Mozambique studying whale sharks and manta rays. Part of my mission was to create camera traps, underwater camera traps, to be able to study these creatures. This was a collaboration with a PhD student at the time, Dan. And the idea was that manta rays, they have these unique dot patterns on their dorsal side. It's kind of like a fingerprint. It's unique to every individual. And if you have photographs of individual manta rays, you can start either manually or automatically start classifying them as, okay, this is a unique individual. So then you can take photographs of manta rays, and you have, let's say, a photograph of a manta ray from Thailand, and you have another one from Mozambique. And then you're like, oh, this manta ray has now migrated from Thailand to Mozambique, which means that this is the size of their range. And you can use this data to help protect them, protect their habitats. And this is kind of what the mission of Marine Megafauna Foundation, the research organization I was working for, this is part of their mandate. So Dan and I, we set out to create a system that could do this. And the idea was you'd have a camera trap in a reef where mantas come regularly, and you'd be able to automatically take photographs of them. Now, it's very difficult to take automatic imagery underwater because the regular camera trap mechanisms of infrared or acoustic don't work underwater. So we had to come up with a novel system. And we used lasers to kind of detect manta rays, take photographs of them, and so forth. Prototyping hardware in Mozambique was very difficult because you couldn't order on Amazon and things would show up the next day. You know, we built these housings that would have to survive at 30 meters underwater, and inevitably things broke. We built this beautiful, scrappy piece of hardware that worked for some time, and that's Dan sealing up the final housing that's sitting in the reef there. And we were able to conduct part of these studies. Eventually, the thing broke down and it fell apart. But in the process, again, it strengthened this idea that about empathy. And specifically, what happened was, when I was living in, a part of the research was to go diving every day, to collect data about these creatures. And in rural Mozambique, the waters are insane. It's very biodiverse. It's very active with life. And during whale season, you'd be surrounded by whales when you go diving. I had grown up with almost a congenital fear of water. My grandfather died in a swimming accident. Most people in my family didn't know how to swim. I had barely learned how to swim, and I actually learned how to scuba dive so that I could get over my fear of water and hence be able to swim. I wouldn't recommend this, but it worked for me. So I find myself in Mozambique, diving on a daily basis in fairly dangerous waters. And in whale season, I've gone down on this particular dive, and instantly it's like I'm in, chicken soup. The water is full of plankton. It is, it is so dense that I can't even see my hand if I stick it out in front of my face. The light is so suffused, you can't tell up from down. You're neutral buoyancy, and I'm lost. And the first rule of diving is, don't lose your diving buddy. I've lost my diving buddy, my entire crew. Can't even see the reefs. There's no navigation, and all my childhood fears come flooding back. And I can hear all these whales around me. They're literally everywhere. And, the way sound works underwater is very interesting because your ears don't pick it up. Your body picks it up. It goes through your bones. So you can't localize sound. So it feels like it's everywhere. And, I'm starting to freak out. But these whales, they start singing after a while. And they start singing in this synchronized way. And they're so close to me at this point that it feels like the whale song is like welling up from inside of me. And at this point, I just let go and I just give in. And it's this really beautiful, serene moment where all these whales are singing and I'm just engulfed by their song. And, after a while, the magic, disappears. The plankton clears. I find my group and, come up to the surface. Everything is, of course, okay. And I remember getting to the surface and thinking, wow, I'm so lucky to have these experiences where I went from being petrified of the ocean to having this bond with the ocean. And, so few people in the world will actually experience this and be able to build this bond. And I thought, hey, what if you could combine some form of VR, perhaps, with water, with the tactility, with the feeling of water, to actually, recreate these experiences and have people be able to build these bonds where otherwise they wouldn't. And many years later, I met my co-founders who shared this vision. And we built this, essentially this system where you have a virtual reality headset that's embedded inside a snorkel mask. And you're able to float. You're literally in water doing VR. And it has a lot of interesting aspects. So I'm going to play a quick video for you, which shows some of this. Forgive the music. So one of the interesting aspects of this is that when we immerse our bodies or our faces in water, something called the mammalian dive reflex kicks in, where the blood in your limbs goes to your core, your heart rate slows down, and effectively the chatter in your brain dies down. So if you've gone swimming or snorkeling or scuba diving, or even splashed your face with water, you'll notice a calming effect. And so we actually build on this, and having both being immersed in water and also being immersed in VR leads to this idea of a double immersion. And this can be really powerful because when you're, so the other thing that water does is got tactility, and it enables neutral buoyancy. So you're lacking gravity essentially. But the tactility of water makes you more aware of your body. It enhances the proprioceptors of your body, so you can feel your body more. So in effect, you are more connected to your body. And remember, because you're breathing through a snorkel, you can hear and feel your breath more. So it ends up with enabling mindfulness in the entire process. And that, with the right form of storytelling and the immersion that this double immersion is providing, can bring about empathy. And this combination is very powerful because it can lead to building compassion. And this is what some people had to say about underwater VR. But all jokes aside, it's an interesting point because it's a dirty secret in the VR industry is that most people who work there, we don't actually like VR. Nobody likes having a box strapped to their face, with electronics in it, especially if you're in water. And you don't want to spend your time in this all the time. But something really magical does happen when you combine water and VR. And it's not VR, it's really the water that brings about all these very interesting combinations to the forefront. And that can have profound implications on your body and mind, and allowing these feelings and these emotions to come around. And we're working with Stanford at the VR lab there to quantify some of these effects. And the first paper's just been published in Nature this year. I'm going to jump to the last bit of my presentation here. This is a famous image from the Voyager in the 70s that was sent back. This is the pale blue dot, which you might know. In the process of going through these steps and meandering through this journey, where I'm now, I also realized that I'm trying to bring about systemic change and change in people's behavior towards the environment. And at some point, I feel like I'm, reshuffling deck chairs on the Titanic, so to speak. And so I've decided to take a slightly different way of looking at this, which is aligning incentives for human society, which is a different way, which is sort of a systemic way of trying to bring about change. So what I'm working on now is essentially building this like digital twin of the ecosystem health of the entire biosphere, essentially, and using blockchains to bring about payments for ecosystem services. This is a very complex topic and it's very ambitious, and we can talk about it soon. Um, I just want to bring up two quick themes that have been very prevalent, or enablers that have been very prevalent in my journey. The first one is this idea of mindful meandering. I give myself a few years to experiment and try a few things and see where it goes. And this meandering has really been fruitful for me, and it's allowed serendipity to happen because I was able to put myself in different positions, in try different things, meet different people, and that's really led to this really strange and spread out body of work. And this is coherent to me now only in hindsight, because hindsight is 2020. But it didn't always make sense while I was doing it, and I had to just be like, I don't know what the right decision is, but just do it. So these are the four themes I've presented here. First is building technology to be able to change, affect people in ways that tools can. Using storytelling to be able to change ethical structures of people, because because storytelling is so embedded in us, from the first campfire stories. And then empathy, which can really lead to us, being more connected to other individuals, to nature, to the world around us, that can build compassion for the world around us. And then finally, I'm plunging myself into the world of incentive structures, which is a whole other world that I really have to get good at pretty soon. Otherwise, I won't do very well in my PhD. And that's all from me. Please feel free to drop me a line. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.